In this video, I am going to show you how to use matrices to solve the ideal op-amp practice problem that the professor goes over on his YouTube video. So you can always go back and watch that video to see where these equations are coming from, but we'll get into it just so that you have another way to solve problems on a handheld device in the future. This is how to solve a system of equations using a matrix. I already wrote everything out because it's a lot to write out, but I'm going to go through and explain exactly what I did. First, I took my KCL and EFC equations and I put them into a more workable form for a matrix. I moved all of the variables to one side of the equation and all of my constants to the other side, which I did right here. You can see in that first equation I made sure all of my currents were on one side. And throughout all of the equations, I made sure all of my constants were on the right side and all of my variables were on the left side. Then I set up my matrix, and the basic format of a matrix is shown here. So I took my equations and I input them into this format, and I listed all of my variables right here. And the way that you list these variables is how you'll have to input them into your matrix. For instance, I can color code this just to make it make more sense because I had difficulty with this when I was first learning it. But this since the I1 is first here, it will line up. This will be the I1 spot in the matrix. This is the I2. It will line up with this being the I2 spot. I3, I3, I4, I4, I5, I5, I6, I6. V01, 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 V01. But that's exactly how the variables line up, and each row is the same. So this column will all be I1, this column will all be I2, I3, I4, I5, I6, V01, V02. Just so you know how you're inputting the variables, which I'm sure you all already know this because you've probably taken linear algebra. But just a little refresher. So I took all of these equations right here, and I just input them using the variables. So for this first spot, I had a 1 in my I1, I used a 1, I2 a -1, I3 -1, and then zeros throughout. And then on this side I had a 0, so over here I put a 0 for my constant. And I did that for the rest of these equations. Once I had my matrix completely filled out, I just used this equation and I input it into a calculator and calculated all of my variables that way, and I'll show you how to do that on a TI-84. So this is a TI-84, and this is how to use the matrix functions. The first thing you have to do is hit second, matrix, and then here you can click over to edit, and then click on the matrix you want to edit, and then here you can change the number of terms in your matrix and go through and input all of your information. I already have it input for this particular matrix that we made earlier in the video. And then you can also see this is my B, which is where all of the constants are. So in order to solve this, we're going to use the same equation that I had written out, the inverse of A times the B, and then you just hit enter, and it will give you all of the values here to all of the variables, and it's in the exact same order as we had written down in our matrix. So this first one is I1, I2, I3, I4, I5, I6, V01, V02. So that's how to do it on a TI-84.